In the autumn of 1941, Odessa was one of the largest port cities on the Black Sea. It was a commercial, cultural, and ethnically diverse center. Ukrainians, Russians, Jews, Greeks, and a small Romanian community. The port of Odessa was not only a vital point for imports and exports, but also a strategic gateway to the Black Sea, a position that any occupying force could use to control supply lines across southern Ukraine. Before the Axis forces advanced into southern Ukraine, Odessa became an occupation target, both for its location and its symbolic importance, a major, wealthy port city with a large Jewish population. The presence of local militia units, resistance groups, and Soviet intelligence networks made the city a tense hotspot, where whoever gained control would inevitably trigger tragedies. Few people know that, right before the massacre, the city had already endured days of tension with initial suppression campaigns. Civilians lived in fear, and rumors of harsh punishment spread throughout the streets. Historians emphasize that Odessa was chosen not only for military strategy but also because of the political calculations of Ion Antonescu, the leader of Romania, who sought to prove absolute loyalty to Berlin. Odessa, in 1941, was a picture of strategy, politics, and human tragedy. The tragedy did not come only from gunfire, but also from the cold calculations of those driven by power. This was the beginning of a chain of events whose consequences would be etched deeply into the history of Eastern Europe. Odessa, before the massacre, a strategic center and a diverse community. Before the war reached the city, Odessa was a busy port, full of commerce and culture, with around 400,000 residents. The Jewish community, around 40,000 to 50,000 people, operated many shops, workshops, schools, and charitable organizations. Native Ukrainians made up most of the remaining population, while the Russian immigrant community and a small group of Romanians helped create a city diverse in language, religion, and culture. This diversity was not only a source of vitality but also carried underlying political and social tensions. Jews, who held important economic positions, were often viewed both as symbols of success and as outsiders in the eyes of extremist leaders. Intellectuals, wealthy merchants, and those with connections to the Soviet Union also became groups easily targeted as tensions increased. Strategically, Odessa was a key link, a seaport connected to the Black Sea, a railway hub to Crimea and the Ukrainian interior, storage sites for food and fuel, and a symbolic position of power and prestige. This made Odessa not only a military target but also a political focal point. Both German and Romanian forces understood that controlling Odessa meant gaining major influence in the region, but they also had to face a population ready to hide, resist, or join Soviet intelligence networks. Researchers emphasize that the prolonged tensions before Axis forces advanced created a socially pressured environment. Rumors of punishment spread through the neighborhoods. Civilian militia groups secretly organized reconnaissance and sabotage, and residents lived in constant fear. The combination of economic, strategic, and demographic factors turned Odessa into a pressure cooker, ready to explode the moment military and political power decided to intervene. Ion Antonescu and Romanian forces, decisions and strategy in Odessa. Ion Antonescu, who led Romania from 1940, served both as president and as commander-in-chief of the Romanian army. Born in 1882 into a traditional military family, Antonescu was formally trained at Romanian and French officer academies, had served as a military attaché in Paris, and was one of Romania's most experienced field officers after the First World War. Before entering politics, he was known for his strict discipline, his rigid military thinking, and his extreme belief that a state could only be strong when power was concentrated entirely in the army and in the supreme leadership. These experiences convinced him that the Odessa campaign was not only a military offensive, but a political test to prove that Romania could act independently while remaining absolutely loyal to Hitler in Berlin. He believed that controlling this strategic port city would strengthen the nation's position while sending a strong message to the government and to local communities that Romanian authority must be obeyed without exception. Ion Antonescu was particularly focused on suppressing groups considered dangerous: the Jewish community, individuals connected to the Soviet Union, as well as intellectuals and wealthy merchants. These groups, in his view, were both socially marginal and potential political threats who might resist Romanian rule or cooperate with Soviet forces. Romanian forces played a decisive role throughout the occupation campaign. Infantry divisions, supported by artillery and mechanized cavalry, worked closely with the German Wehrmacht and took responsibility for sealing the city, controlling the roads, and establishing patrol checkpoints in residential districts. While German Einsatzgruppen units were known for their precise manhunts and elite methods, most mass executions, from identifying suspects and compiling lists to organizing firing squads, were in fact carried out directly by Romanian forces. This is a detail rarely mentioned in mainstream accounts. Romanian troops were the primary actors during the initial phase of the Odessa Massacre. Another little-known fact is that Romanian commanders under Antonescu viewed Odessa as a test of administrative capability, whether the Romanian state could independently manage population control and conduct warfare as an internal political tool without direct German supervision. These plans involved not only military operations but also administrative procedures, document inspections, civilian registries, and cooperation with Romanian intelligence agencies. This demonstrates that the Odessa campaign was not simply a battle, but a defining example of how an authoritarian regime could combine military force with administrative and political machinery to achieve its wartime objectives: suppress a society. Antonescu's decisions regarding military coordination and civilian repression laid the groundwork for the massacres that followed and shaped his historical legacy as a brutal yet calculating leader. Odessa Massacre: repression tactics and civilian tragedy. In the first weeks of occupying Odessa, Romanian forces, with limited support from Einsatzgruppen of Germany, not only carried out standard military operations, but also applied a systematic mechanism of repression. Those considered political threats, including intellectuals, Jewish merchants, former Soviet officials, and members of local militias, were gathered into designated areas for summary trials and on-the-spot executions. One of the less frequently mentioned events was the so-called Suspicion Bridge. Individuals accused of being Bolsheviks or linked to resistance activities were assembled on a bridge spanning the Dniester River, then shot or thrown into the water. Many drowned, while survivors had to swim against the current or hide in rock crevices and basements. This tactic was designed to limit witnesses and create a climate of terror throughout the city. For the Jewish community, estimated at 40,000 to 50,000 people before the war, they became the primary targets. Victim lists were compiled based on identity papers, clothing, occupation, or any signs deemed irregular under Romanian authorities. Kripo reports noted that within just a few weeks, approximately 25,000 to 34,000 individuals were killed. Survival was extremely rare. Those who remained, fewer than 200, often relied on local assistance, hid in basements or warehouses, or blended into temporarily displaced populations. To erase traces, victims' bodies were buried in mass graves, after which Romanian forces poured quicklime over them. Documentation of execution lists, reports, and kill orders was destroyed immediately afterward. Although the cooperation between Romanian and German forces was recorded in Kripo reports, many details remain unclear, making it difficult to reconstruct the Odessa tragedy accurately, and it has never been fully detailed in many historical studies. The psychological pressure on Odessa residents was immense. Fear spread from one neighborhood to another. Rumors of shootings made people almost afraid to leave their homes, communicate, or resist. The selection of bridges, rivers, and suburban areas for executions was a deliberate strategy, to both minimize witnesses and instill strategic terror. This is a vivid illustration of how concentrated power and war were used as instruments of political control and systemic terror. The failure of the Romanian-German Allied forces at Odessa. From the end of August to early October of 1941, Odessa became the focus of a major offensive conducted by the German-Romanian alliance. In theory, with support from the Wehrmacht, Romanian forces held numerical superiority. approximately 100,000 to 120,000 Romanian soldiers, along with 16,000 to 20,000 German troops. However, on the ground, the situation was quite different. Soviet defensive units, numbering around 30,000 soldiers, together with local militias and volunteer forces, established a network of fortifications, machine gun nests, bunkers, trenches, and on-site intelligence networks. These fortifications enabled effective resistance, preventing Romanian forces from capturing key areas from the outset. Coordination between German and Romanian forces faced numerous difficulties. Romanian divisions lacked heavy equipment, artillery was limited, and tactical command capability was not fully developed, while Romanian commanders often focused on repressing civilians rather than implementing flexible tactics. This resulted in slow progress and high casualties. Romanian military reports recorded approximately 7,000 to 10,000 Axis soldiers killed or wounded during nearly 2 months of siege. Strong Soviet counterattacks further delayed the complete occupation of the city, forcing Romania and Germany to adopt alternative tactics, including establishing concentration zones and executing civilians to create a climate of terror, compelling residents to comply and relieving pressure on defenses. The campaign concluded with Odessa's fall in mid-October of 1941, but not solely due to military pressure. Success largely depended on the implementation of systematic terror measures against civilians rather than direct combat. Historians consider the initial failure of the Axis at Odessa as clear evidence of Romania's strategic limitations, its dependence on Germany, and the unexpected effectiveness of organized civilian resistance. Trial and execution for war crimes. Ion Antonescu, who had served as the head of the Romanian government during World War II, was arrested immediately following the defeat of the Romanian-German Axis and brought to trial at the Romanian court in 1946. The proceedings focused on his personal responsibility in military campaigns and genocidal actions, most notably the Odessa Massacre, where tens of thousands of civilians, primarily Jews, were killed within just a few weeks. Prosecutors presented detailed accounts of Antonescu's actions. He directly signed orders and approved execution plans, established a strict system for civilian control, and directed coordination with German forces. Reports, correspondence, and Kripo records demonstrated that Antonescu closely monitored every step of implementation, from compiling lists of suspects, selecting execution sites, to organizing firing squads and choosing bridges, rivers, and suburban areas as execution zones. An important point emphasized during the trial was the political and ethnic intent of the massacre. The killing of Jews and those deemed Bolsheviks was not a random military act, but a deliberate campaign to eliminate groups considered threats to Romanian power while demonstrating absolute loyalty to Hitler. Prosecutors highlighted the coordination between Antonescu's personal decisions and the administrative and military apparatus to carry out mass shootings. Defense attorneys attempted to justify these actions as wartime decisions, but evidence from surviving witnesses, administrative records, and military reports completely refuted this. Antonescu understood the consequences of his crimes, yet executed a systematic, calculated, and ruthless campaign. The trial clearly affirmed the personal responsibility of a state leader for war crimes, setting an important legal precedent in Eastern Europe for holding national leaders accountable. Ultimately, Antonescu was sentenced to death and publicly executed in June of 1946. Images of the trial and execution became powerful legal testimony, sending a message about individual accountability for war crimes, while affirming that concentrated power does not exempt one from legal punishment. This event also provided a critical legal and documentary basis for history to record and analyze the Odessa massacre in detail, allowing researchers to reconstruct leadership decisions and their humanitarian consequences. The execution of Ion Antonescu. On the 1st of June 1946, after the death sentence was confirmed, Ion Antonescu was taken to Gilava Fortress, where Romania executed high-ranking war criminals. The execution site was not inside the central prison, but in the parade ground outside the fortress, an area previously used for official state executions. He and 3 other high-ranking figures, Mihai Antonescu, Constantin Vasiliu, and Gheorghe Alexianu were led to the execution site. Each man stood in front of a separate wooden stake several meters away. They were not blindfolded. According to eyewitness accounts, Antonescu chose not to cover his eyes, saying he wanted to face his fate. A team of Romanian soldiers, composed of multiple marksmen, was positioned in advance, arranged in 2 rows. Distances to the targets were clearly marked, according to the Romanian military standards of the time. The signal was given through the decisive command of the firing squad commander. As the volley rang out, military doctors and supervising officers approached to confirm the status of each individual according to legal procedure. In Romania at that period, a secondary volley was always prepared in case a target had not been immediately killed, ensuring that the sentence was carried out in full compliance with the law. The legacy of Odessa, wounds of memory and historical responsibility. Looking back at Odessa after October 1941, researchers note that the consequences were not limited to the number of people killed, but lay in how the Romanian-German power system organized, concealed, and legitimized violence. Administrative documents discovered after the war, from reports of the Romanian Ministry of Internal Affairs to combat diaries of German units, show that the massacre was not a spontaneous event, but part of an institutionalized system of repression. One of the most severe consequences was the near-total disappearance of the Jewish social structure in Odessa. Before the war, this community played a crucial role in commerce, culture, education, and urban life. After the massacre and subsequent deportations to Transnistria, over 70% of Odessa's Jewish population never returned. This created a demographic and cultural void that the city would take decades to partially mend. Numerous post-war testimonies describe the horror of hearing gunfire for hours or being forced to pass burning buildings where hundreds had been confined. These experiences created a form of collective traumatic memory, leading a generation of Odessa residents to live in silence and caution when recounting the events of 1941. Soviet records collected from late 1943, when the Red Army liberated Odessa, show that some areas still contained human remains in unmarked mass graves, and many administrative documents had been deliberately destroyed. Modern scholars assess that Antonescu's government's effort to erase evidence was part of a strategy of memory management, aiming to ensure that the crimes could not be traced directly back to those responsible. From a Holocaust studies perspective, Odessa became a paradigmatic case of collaboration-based genocide on a large scale. Unlike many areas directly controlled by Germany, in Odessa, the Romanian military played the leading role in decision-making, organization, and execution. This raises challenging questions for post-war Romanian historians. How could a German allied state, yet with its own administrative structures, participate so deeply in mass atrocities? Declassified documents after 1990 further highlight an often overlooked consequence: the overlap of war, ethnic politics, and military strategy. Odessa was a strategic port city. The cleansing of its population was viewed as necessary to control the rear and protect German-Romanian logistics in the Black Sea. This perspective, treating civilians as a security threat, became a key factor in the escalation of uncontrolled violence. Today, walking through the Holocaust Memorial in Odessa, one does not confront only numbers or stone markers, but the legacy of a crime executed through administrative orders, voluntary collaboration, and the enforced silence of an entire system. Historians emphasize that understanding Odessa correctly is not just understanding the events of 1941, but understanding how a state can turn itself into an instrument of atrocity when power is unrestrained by ethical considerations. Odessa's memory, a warning from systematic violence. The Odessa Massacre and the execution of Ion Antonescu reveal a chilling truth. When absolute power is granted to individuals who believe they are saving the nation, history often pays the price in the blood of the innocent. Odessa exemplifies how a state apparatus, from leadership to administrative and military forces, can legitimize violence through a few lines of orders and execute it with terrifying precision. More than 25,000 lives disappeared in a matter of weeks, reflecting not only the cruelty of a military decision, but also the accumulated years of hatred, prejudice, anti-Jewish propaganda, and obsession with national security nurtured by the Antonescu regime. Looking at memorials, the remnants of wartime walls, and incomplete lists of victims, we are compelled to ask, what allowed a normal society to consent or remain silent when tragedies like Odessa unfolded? More importantly, can we recognize warning signs when history begins to repeat these dangerous patterns? Recounting the Odessa massacre is not meant to nurture hatred. It is our responsibility to those who were lost, to ensure that silence, indifference, and blind faith in power never again pave the way for another horror. Thank you for watching this video. If you wish to continue exploring the hidden chapters of the Third Reich, subscribe to the channel to not miss future content.